Imagine being pulled over for a broken taillight, only to have the situation spiral into something you never expected. A fight for dignity, respect, and justice. This is the story of an arrogant police officer, a calm but powerful senator, and a life-changing encounter that no one saw coming. What happens next will not only shock you, but leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, prejudice, and redemption. Before we dive into this intense and emotional journey, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. Officer James Porter prowled the streets with an air of authority, a man who believed his badge granted him unchecked power. Known for his sharp instincts and even sharper temper, Porter had earned a reputation for keeping troublemakers in line. But beneath the surface of his supposed professionalism lay a pattern of profiling and an unspoken bias he'd never dared to confront. Earlier that day, Porter had pulled over a young black man for a broken taillight. The stop ended in intimidation. A warning barked, and the man sent on his way, shaken but unharmed. For Porter, it was routine. Elsewhere, a sleek black sedan glided into the city limits. Inside sat Senator Mark Reynolds, returning to the very streets that shaped him, a man of integrity and resilience. Mark had risen from humble beginnings to become one of the nation's most respected voices for racial equity. As the skyline came into view, he reflected on the progress made and the miles yet to go, the weight of his upcoming speech pressing on him. But he had no idea his journey home would force him into a confrontation more personal and more dangerous than any debate in the Senate chamber. Unbeknownst to either man, their paths were set to collide that night, a collision that would test their convictions, challenge their beliefs, and alter their lives forever. It was a quiet evening on the streets when Officer James Porter noticed a black sedan with a flickering taillight cruising through his beat. His instincts, honed more by prejudice than evidence, told him to act. Suspicious, he muttered under his breath as he flipped on his lights and pulled the car over. For Porter, this was just another routine stop. But for the man inside the car, this would be anything but routine. The black sedan rolled to a halt, its driver calm and composed. Senator Mark Reynolds, returning to his hometown, watched as Porter approached with heavy footsteps and a condescending smirk. License and registration, Porter barked, peering into the car like a predator sizing up its prey. Mark handed over his documents without hesitation, his movements deliberate, his face calm. But Porter wasn't satisfied. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You look like someone I've seen on a bulletin recently." Mark raised an eyebrow but complied, stepping onto the dimly lit street. As Porter circled the car, his suspicion grew more performative, his tone dripping with disdain. Mark, ever the statesman, broke the silence. "Officer, is there a specific reason for this treatment?" His voice was calm but firm, the kind of composure that could disarm an entire Senate chamber. For Porter, it had the opposite effect. "Oh, we've got a talker," Porter sneered. "Maybe you think you're above the law, huh? Let's see some ID." Mark reached into his wallet and produced his senator badge. For a moment, Porter's expression flickered, confusion, disbelief, but it quickly hardened. "This a joke?" Porter snapped. "Fake credentials won't help you here." The tension climbed, sharp and suffocating. Porter's hand drifted to his holster, his fingers brushing the cold steel of his weapon. And then, a voice crackled over the radio. Backup was arriving. A senior officer stepped out of the squad car and froze when he saw who Porter was dealing with. "Senator Reynolds?" he stammered. The air shifted instantly. Porter's face twisted in humiliation as the superior officer quickly de-escalated the situation, apologizing profusely to Mark. But the damage was done. Mark, ever composed, looked at Porter one last time before getting back into his car. What happens next? Well, let's just say, this is only the beginning of Porter's reckoning. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. It's about to get intense. The morning after the encounter, the world woke up to a storm. Unbeknownst to Officer James Porter, Senator Mark Reynolds had recorded the entire interaction from his car. By sunrise, the footage was everywhere: news outlets, social media, and even the front page of national papers. The video showed Porter's condescension, his baseless accusations, and his hand inching toward his weapon. The public was outraged. The hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Justice for All, hashtag Mark Reynolds, and hashtag Police Accountability. News anchors dissected every frame of the footage, and late-night hosts turned Porter into the face of unchecked authority. In the video, Mark's calm, dignified composure stood in stark contrast to Porter's aggression, and it sparked a national conversation. Hours later, Senator Reynolds addressed the nation. Standing at a podium with the words "equal justice" behind him, he spoke not with anger, but with purpose. "What happened to me," he began, his voice steady, "is not unique. It is a reality that far too many Black Americans face every day, regardless of their status, profession, or achievements. Last night, I was not a senator. I was just another Black man who posed a threat for no reason, and that should terrify us all." His words reverberated across the country. He didn't call for vengeance or outrage. He called for change. Mark Reynolds' speech was shared millions of times, sparking both praise and deeper reflection. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Officer Porter felt the walls closing in. Cameras swarmed the department, reporters demanding answers. Porter, now the center of a national firestorm, sat at his desk fuming. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "The media is twisting the truth." But the department couldn't ignore the uproar. An internal investigation was launched, and Porter was placed on temporary leave. Still, he refused to back down, defending his actions to anyone who would listen. "The guy was acting suspicious," he told a colleague. "How was I supposed to know he was a senator?" But the world wasn't buying it. As pressure mounted, Porter began to realize that this was no longer just about a traffic stop. It was about something much bigger, a system he was now being forced to reckon with. And little did he know, the reckoning was just beginning. The uproar surrounding the incident could have easily ended with disciplinary action, or even the termination of Officer James Porter. But Senator Mark Reynolds, ever the visionary, saw an opportunity for something far greater than punishment. He saw the chance for transformation. Behind closed doors, Mark met with the city's police chief, a pragmatic man who was equally tired of the department's growing list of controversies. As the cameras and protests raged outside, Mark laid out his proposal with calm precision. "Firing him solves nothing," he said. "It's too easy. I want him to see the world through the eyes of the people he's harmed. Let him walk the streets of my community, hear their stories, and understand their struggles. 6 weeks in my outreach program. Let him face the truth he's been blind to." The chief hesitated. This wasn't standard protocol, but it was hard to argue with Mark's logic. After a long pause, he finally nodded. 6 weeks, the chief agreed, and if he refuses, he's suspended without pay. When the decision reached Porter, his reaction was as predictable as it was explosive. "This is a joke, right?" he snarled, slamming the memo down on his desk. "They want me to play babysitter in some outreach program? No way. I'm a cop, not a social worker." But the chief wasn't playing games. He stared Porter down with the weight of decades in law enforcement. "This isn't a negotiation, Porter. You either take this assignment or you're off the force." Porter's defiance flared, but deep down he knew he had no choice. With his career on the line, he reluctantly agreed, though not without muttering under his breath about political stunts and catering to the media. As he prepared for his first day in the program, Porter couldn't shake the feeling that this was a punishment designed to humiliate him. What he didn't realize, however, was that it would become something much more, a journey that would force him to confront the biases he'd long ignored and challenge everything he thought he knew about justice and humanity. And so, Officer James Porter stepped reluctantly into the unknown, unaware that the next 6 weeks would change not only his life, but the lives of those around him. Day one of the outreach program was a culture shock for Officer James Porter. He arrived in a crisp uniform, badge gleaming, trying to cling to the authority he was used to wielding. But here, in the heart of Senator Mark Reynolds' community, his badge carried no weight. The streets bustled with life, every corner humming with resilience and hardship. Porter didn't want to be there, and it showed in his stiff posture and skeptical glare. Mark Reynolds greeted him with a firm handshake and a calm, unshakable demeanor. "Welcome to my world, Officer Porter," he said, his tone neither mocking nor condescending, but filled with purpose. "Let's get started." The first stop was a dilapidated apartment complex where Porter met families struggling to make ends meet. A mother of three described her fear of sending her teenage son out at night, knowing he could be judged by his skin before his character. A local business owner shared how a single arrest years ago still haunted him, keeping him from securing loans and opportunities. Porter stood silently, arms crossed, but their words lingered in the back of his mind. Days turned into weeks, and Mark never lectured. Instead, he let the community speak for itself. Porter saw kids playing on cracked sidewalks, their laughter masking the challenges they faced. He listened as elders recounted decades of being ignored by the very systems meant to protect them. The stories weren't confrontational. They were honest, raw, and impossible to dismiss. But the turning point came one hot afternoon. As Porter and Mark walked the streets, they heard a commotion nearby, a heated argument escalating between two young men. A crowd had gathered, tension thick in the air, fists were clenched, and violence was moments away. Before Porter could act, Mark stepped forward. "We're not doing this today," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority and empathy. The young men hesitated, their anger faltering under Mark's gaze. But the situation remained volatile, and for the first time, Porter saw the community not as suspects, but as people, complex, hurt, and desperate for guidance. Without thinking, Porter stepped forward. "Enough," he said, his voice steady but devoid of the usual force. "Whatever this is, it's not worth it." He didn't bark orders or reach for his weapon. He simply spoke. Slowly, the tension eased, and the crowd began to disperse. The two young men backed away, their rage cooling into reluctant respect. As the dust settled, Mark turned to Porter, his expression unreadable. "That," he said quietly, "is what this community needs. Not fear, not force, understanding." For the first time, Porter felt something shift within him. The walls he had built, the judgments, the biases were starting to crack. He realized that these weren't just stories. They were lives, and his role wasn't to dominate but to protect. That moment marked a change, subtle but profound. For the first time, Officer Porter saw the humanity in the people he had long dismissed, and he began to understand that the badge he wore came with responsibilities far greater than he had ever imagined. The 6 weeks came to an end, but Officer James Porter knew his journey was far from over. On the final day of the program, he stood across from Senator Mark Reynolds in a quiet community center, the weight of his experiences etched into his face. For the first time, Porter broke his silence. "I was wrong," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I didn't see it before, the fear, the pain, the humanity. I thought wearing this badge gave me the right to judge, but all it did was blind me to the people I was supposed to serve. You opened my eyes." He paused, his fists clenched as if holding back a tide of emotions. "I don't know how to fix it all, but I promise I'll try. I'll be better. I owe them that." Mark's expression softened, his calm confidence now tinged with quiet satisfaction. He nodded, saying only, "The first step is seeing. The rest is up to you." That evening, Mark took the stage to deliver his much-anticipated keynote address. The crowd fell silent as he began, his voice resonating with both authority and compassion. 6 weeks ago, I was reminded that change begins with a single moment, a moment of fear, of pain, of confrontation. But from that moment can come growth, understanding, and ultimately hope. He paused. the weight of his words sinking into the audience. What I experienced wasn't just about me. It was about a system that fails to see its own flaws. And it was about the courage to face those flaws head on. Accountability is not just about punishment. It's about transformation. Empathy must lead the way. As the crowd erupted in applause, one man stood in the back, clapping quietly but earnestly. Porter, dressed in plain clothes, watched as a man he once saw as an adversary became his inspiration. In the weeks that followed, Porter returned to the precinct with a new mission. In the final scene, he stood in the locker room beside a young, wide-eyed rookie, sharing hard-earned wisdom. "Listen," Porter said, his tone softer than it had ever been. "You're going to see things that challenge you. Don't let the badge make you forget the people. Be better than I was." The rookie nodded, and as Porter walked out into the sunlight, there was a quiet resolve in his step. He was no longer the man he had been. He was something better, a protector, a mentor, and, finally, a man who understood what it truly meant to serve. Did you find this story fascinating? Kindly hit the subscribe button to stay connected for more interesting stories. Happy New Year in advance!